So I used to watch a lot of the content put out by new atheist figures, people such as Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and so on. And I don't do that so much anymore, or I went through a lot of doing that when I was a teenager, more like. And there are new atheist figures on the scene now, kind of a lot of these kind of Christopher Hitchens replacement wannabe types, people like Alex J. O'Connor, the Cosmic Skeptic, and so on. And in the rhetoric of these sorts of people on YouTube, and even in the rhetoric of people like Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, and so on, I very rarely, if ever, hear them talk about Benedict Spinoza and pantheism. And from the perspective of philosophy of religion, since Spinoza really probably made about the greatest contribution to the philosophy of religion in the last 500 years, I've said, um, we don't, none of that content engages usefully with the proposition of whether or not God exists in the universe. Since after, in a post-enlightenment world, there's no real possibility of having an informed discussion about religion and about God without having Spinoza's philosophy of pantheism as the starting point of that discussion, since that that his work was the starting point of the Enlightenment. In fact, his work gave rise to atheism as we currently understand it. And really omitting Spinoza from that sort of discussion, I think is intellectually dishonest. And I think it's trying to rabble rouse Christians and trying to be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, or even more cynically being contrarian for the sake of trying to make money and selling your content. So yeah, I'm not such a huge fan of the new atheists now, and having read Spinoza, um, that really is the only argument that makes sense to me. And after having read Spinoza, and you've got this notion of pantheism wherein God is the universe, and there's a very, very tight logical case to be made for that. Power exists within the universe. We know that people are at least powerful. We know that people are part of the universe. Hence, if God did not include the power of humanity and the rest of the universe, God would not be all powerful. God would not be all powerful if we were to subtract the power of humanity from God. Therefore, if God is to be all powerful, must be the universe. And that's the rough logical case for pantheism. And pantheism holds up absolutely in my mind. And seeing all religions as manifestations of nature worship, I think that's something that a lot of us do anyway. And I think after that point, which is a point that occurred about, well, 400 something years ago, or 300 something years ago with Spinoza in the 16th century, that's really where it can end. We don't need to talk about God or religion much more after that point. If we happen to be practitioners of a sort of religious craft or spiritual tradition, then yeah, by all means, I think we should be allowed to continue in this. People find in it all sorts of things that help them personally on a personal level, and they don't see it as mind forged manacles or anything like that, and they see it more as something that liberates them and provides them with comfort, then I don't really want to be the person standing in the way of that. So like I'm not out to change anyone's beliefs. As such, I'm not, well, at all, really. I mean, atheist or pantheist or Christian or whatever you call yourself, it's actually of no real interest to me. And it's of no real interest to me to proselytize and try and change people's faith, change people's opinion about God. It's actually of no interest to me at all. But really, what the new atheist thinkers do is dishonest as what sort of evangelical types do. And atheists, they are evangelicals, in my opinion. Just they're contra evangelicals, if you like. They see all these people who are going through crises of faith within the huge masses of people that make up religious populations around the world, and they garner views on YouTube and things like this for those reasons. Whereas a pantheist could just look at all this and say, well, I believe that God is the universe, and it's not really in my interest to try and change anyone's opinion about God. even though the logical case for pantheism is pretty much absolute. And yeah, other than that, there's not much that needs to be said. Could there be a deist god? That can't be disproven. Could there be an interventionist theist god? Well, the universe is interventionist. It does intervene in our lives. People intervene in our lives, for one thing. We could say that that's God intervening in our lives when other people do. Or when, I don't know, a pigeon shits on your shoe or something. So, like, that's God giving you a hard time. Or when the wind blows your cigarette tobacco away when you're rolling a rollie. You blame God then. But, and all these sorts of things. And find ways of syncretizing your own belief with pantheism, which is really not very hard at all. And yeah, that's Spinoza went to this place, went to this incredibly fertile area of philosophy all these centuries ago, and these new atheist figures largely forgotten about it or don't consider it important, or they're glossing over the fact of Spinoza's existence and arguments to make rather rousing points and to say contrarian things for attention and to try and get money. Because if you go into these sort of debates in religion with the attitude of trying to agree with people or trying to lend philosophical clarity to the debate on religion, and you start out with Spinoza philosophy, you can get very, very far with that very quickly. And it's a discussion that needn't be all that long and protracted, right? Yeah, there's no real debate to be had with that kind of thinking, with that kind of philosophy. So there's actually no debate over religion. The only thing we know for certain that exists is the universe itself. Otherwise, if the universe doesn't exist, what do we mean by existence? It exists, it's tangible, we can touch it, we can measure it. That's the crucial thing about whether or not something exists. If it's measurable, it can be said to exist. Is the universe possessed of awesome power? It most certainly is. It's filled with hundreds of billions of galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars. A star is a very bright, burning, powerful, energetic object, and say that, that's godlike power. To some extent, numerous polytheisms throughout history have done exactly this. And they've said that, the sun is a god, or indeed that the earth is a god, or that the moon is a god, or that each facet of nature has some kind of inner animus, if you like, that that might be considered a god, or could be considered to be, a godlike power in its own right, like Poseidon's the god of the sea, Zeus is the king of the gods, and the thunderer, famously, casting lightning bolts and all this sort of stuff upon his enemies and whatnot. Gods of the hunt, wine, war, and things of that nature. But you can take the sort of polytheism and see those different gods as all aspects of the same ultimate God, which is the universe, right? And in a sense, Greek polytheism does that to some extent because the original God is chaos, right? So everything is ultimately made out of chaos, including the gods. Or there's chaos and the titans and the gods that followed chaos. And yeah, so I personally gain a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment, and it greatly interests me to study religion, and I'm fascinated by religion. I'm fascinated by all religions. So, I don't want to take this kind of snarky atheist position that, it's just all bullshit, it's all rubbish, just like ignore it all, it's all nonsense. But it's all old stories and tales of, I don't know, gods with the head of an elephant or something like that. It has at least an aesthetic appeal to us. And it has a huge appeal to a great many people. And I'm sure even if you were to question a reverend or a priest, about God and what their belief about God is a little bit, they might say, yeah, actually, I do believe this is roughly, the same thing as the entire universe. And there isn't this distinction between the creator and the created. And, maybe you could have like that sort of discussion with a pastor or a reverend. I don't know. But in any case, it's intellectually dishonest for new atheists to espouse the kind of rhetoric they espouse, I think. This kind of very, very confrontational kind of mode of speaking that they have, where, the only enemy to humanity is religion. It could be, nothing associated with corporate greed, for instance. It could be nothing associated with various other forms of intolerance that don't really um, have any grounding in religious belief, such as racism doesn't have like isn't underpinned by religion, or people have used various texts kind of in a very forced way to kind of justify things like racism. But then in that case, it's not the texts that are to blame, it's the racism to blame. And religion is just being used as a justification for whatever it is. And that's very often what happens with religion. It's just people like fish through the Bible for quotes that seem to sort of line up with the agenda they want to push. And, like you get this with Roe versus Wade even and these anti-abortion types. But, it's the agenda that's the problem. It's not religion that's the problem. But if you want to argue against people like that, you need to do so on their own terms because, well, they are too stupid to understand terms other than their own terms. And it's the best way for showing them up to be idiots and hypocrites who've clearly never read the Bible. If you're knowledgeable of the Bible yourself and they're using all these quotes, to go Roe versus Wade and so on, you've got to then demonstrate that your own textual knowledge, your own theological knowledge is greater than theirs. Because after all, the point is to win over the people, is it not? And prevent things like Roe versus Wade being overturned, and to help those women who need abortions and things like this, rather than just arbitrarily winning points or vicariously point scoring to get applause from people who already agree with you in atheist circles.